Welcome to week 16 of Misha and Dianne Watch Santa Barbara.
Hello.
We've just watched episode 76. Originally aired November 12th, 1984. This is a Monday episode, and I was able to watch it because it was a holiday due to Remembrance Day. And I remember several things from this.
And it's a very dramatic episode.
Well, there's an earthquake.
Yes, and they do it in a really interesting way, I thought.
Well, it starts out with a title card that says Monday, November 12th, 1984. They pan across this quiet Santa Barbara. 4:21 p.m. And then suddenly they show one after the other what everyone in Santa Barbara was doing at exactly 4:22 when the earthquake hit.
Yeah.
And I have reorganized this in my usual manner, so we'll see how easy that is to follow.
And I have to say, this reminds me a little bit of that Pompeii exhibit we saw in Seattle a year or so ago, where they had this little recreation, a little video recreating what it would have been like in Pompeii, and it kind of starts the same way, completely peaceful day. And then, the sky getting darker and darker as, in Pompeii's case, the volcano erupts. So, very good technique.
So the scientists see the needles started to go back and forth very rapidly over the graph paper. And they say, it's at least a 7.1, and then later they say it might even be a 7.5.
Yeah.
Epicenter, Santa Barbara. Danny sleeps through the entire earthquake. So Jade's running in and out of the room and all that kind of stuff during the earthquake, and Danny sleeps through the whole thing.
Now, we don't quite know where Jade and Danny are.
It looks a little like possibly the motel room that Lakin and Ted were in all those months ago. We think they're in one of the rooms of the motel/clubhouse.
However, didn't they leave that property forever after the Halloween episode?
Oh. That's true. Well, he certainly wasn't at the Andrade house.
No, and they certainly weren't at the Perkins house. So we're not quite sure where they are. But
That's
wherever they are,
question.
Danny's sleeping with his soccer ball and does not wake up during the earthquake.
He's exhausted from practice.
Yeah.
Now, Warren, who's on horseback, as we remember, in the wilds of the gigantic Lockridge property, goes into a cave and hides the bag of coins behind some rocks.
Yeah.
And then Ted finds him, and they argue a little bit outside, and they go back in for some reason. And then either the earthquake or the aftershock collapses the cave. And Warren rides out, Ted's horse rides out, but Ted is still inside. And he is knocked unconscious by the falling rocks.
Yeah, Ted tries to escape on his horse, and he doesn't, I guess the horse is kind of spooked and jittery, and he doesn't quite manage to get on the horse, and he falls off and is basically stuck in the cave as it falls around him.
They had some really good shots with the camera from inside the cave.
Yeah.
At first I thought some of the interior cave stuff was set, but then it looked like there was some location stuff. Maybe it was a mix, but it looked quite good.
Yeah.
You could see Warren riding on his horse outside while the camera was shooting from the inside.
Yeah. And I have to say, it doesn't look great for Danny, or for Ted at this point.
He's basically, he doesn't move for the rest of the episode. Warren spends a good part of the episode digging a hole in the pile of rubble that's covered the cave opening, and he gets enough rocks out that he can then see Ted lying there, and he believes Ted is dead.
Yeah, because Ted's just lying there, not moving, covered in dust. He's kind of got a few rocks on him. So, yeah, it's not looking good for Ted at this point. And I guess the question is, what does Warren do now? He could keep digging. Now, mind you, if he thinks Ted is dead, and he knows those coins are buried possibly forever in that cave, he could just possibly ride off with a clear conscience.
But I mean, Lakin and others know they're together,
Yeah.
and if they go searching for Ted and find him, they're going to find the coins too.
Yeah, that's true.
Either way, the Capwells are going to blame him for anything, whatever happens to Ted, if he's dead or if he's injured or.
Yeah, and as we'll see later, there's going to be some tensions around this, no matter what happens, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, Mason and Cece start to argue because Mason doesn't know why Cece's insisting that Brandon come home with him, and he's trying to defend Santana, and they end up having a fist fight over it, just as the earthquake starts. And Mason gets thrown off to one side, and a bookshelf falls onto Cece, and he's pinned under it and he can't free himself. Brandon has, I guess, sensibly gone under a coffee table, but quite a large chandelier falls on it.
Yeah.
And after the dust settles, they realize that one leg of the coffee table collapsed, and there's the weight of it is on Brandon's head, and Santana determines that he's not breathing.
Yeah.
So Mason rushes over and performs mouth-to-mouth until Brandon starts breathing again. Then he goes over to Cece, who's still pinned under this bookshelf, and releases him.
And we saw a couple things in this scene, and I don't know quite how it will play out, but Santana is just so upset over, Brandon being knocked out and possibly severely injured, if not killed. And you can kind of see CC observing all this from beneath his bookshelf. And he does seem to be touched by that. The other thing, though, is Santana completely acknowledges that they have to contact Gina, they have to bring her in, that he's going to need his mother. So I think it's really good for CC to see this as well, that in this incredibly emotional moment, Santana is lucid enough to know that Brandon needs Gina.
So Cece then leaves them there, Santana and Brandon.
Yeah.
He says, I've got to get back to the house. I'll tell your parents that you're okay, and I assume my kids will all go to the house.
Yeah.
And so they leave. And
something else I think that could be important happens during this little scene as well. And, as Santana's holding Brandon and, Brandon's recovering, Santana thanks Mason for reviving him. And Mason just looks at her and says, well, I love you. And she says, I love you back to him. And she's not rolling her eyes, and she's not, she's in this moment, seems to be quite sincere.
One thing that happened during the earthquake is the stove was pulled away from the wall, and we could see that it was a gas stove. Nothing seems to have come of that, but they did mention, later on, they mentioned the potential danger from gas.
Yes.
Now, at the Capwell mansion, Gina is on the phone with Rosa, trying to get Santana's phone number when the earthquake starts. And then, of course, the phone gets cut off, and Gina panics about Brandon. She does not mention Summer at all. And Summer is not in this episode, so we have no idea if anything's happened to Summer, but Gina doesn't seem to care.
Well, I thought Gina said that she and Summer were driving up earlier in her conversation with Santana. So my assumption was
Summer's
that
gone to L.A. with her?
Yeah, my assumption was that Summer was with her, maybe just waiting for her in the car or whatever. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So Rosa's trying to find a spot to avoid. There's a lot of kind of tiles and things falling off the roof, and some of the pillars are cracking. There are a lot of pillars in that Capwell atrium.
Yeah.
I mean, Mason later mentions it took 100 years to build, and Cece says his grandfather built it, so I think he must have put in a pillar every year. So Reuben arrives, calling for Rosa. He sees her right away, and he runs across a precarious space to get to the same pillar that she's kind of hiding against. But there's still stuff dropping all over the place around them. Cruz arrives as well, and he basically runs to them and then sort of pulls them back to the door, and they leave the house. So I guess a house full of ceramic tiles is probably a bad place to stay, even though here they tell us to stay indoors because it's dangerous to be outside because all the buildings have glass that's going to fall out. That would be the opposite if your house is falling to pieces.
Yeah, exactly. I have heard that brick is an especially bad material to build your buildings out of if you're in an earthquake zone. So I imagine all those little tiles and things on the Capwell house are probably much better.
Now, Cece and Mason arrive, and Cece spends some time bemoaning the damage to his house before he remembers to tell Rosa and Ruben that Santana's okay.
Yeah.
They ask if anyone's heard from Danny, and they haven't. They do not mention their other 2 daughters, who at one point became 1 daughter and has now become 0 daughters.
Yeah, so if you remember at the very, very beginning of this series, I believe it was when Cruz was first introduced. I think it was Ruben mentioned having 2 other daughters. There was Olivia, who was, I think, a physician, and Gabrielle, who we were, I guess, led to believe was a teenager, because he said something about her always being on the phone. So we heard about that, and then I think in a subsequent episode they mentioned
one of them.
And now
they haven't mentioned either.
Yeah. So, I mean, just from a continuity point of view, I don't know if they are ever mentioned again in the series. I'm pretending in my head that the 2 daughters have gone to Mexico or something to stay
I mean,
with
if
family.
the one is a physician or a resident or what's that thing, the first year thing, maybe that's in a different city, and maybe the younger ones come to visit her.
Yeah.
Maybe they're in L.A., although I'd be worried too
or
if
Chicago
they were in LA.
Or something.
They must be in a non-earthquake city for them not to be worried.
Yeah. So that's what I'm thinking.
And the Andrades let them know that none of the other Capwell kids have come home. Cruz is the only one who came by. So.
And one thing I find interesting throughout this episode is the aftermath of the earthquake is played out, is how many characters throughout this, and not just the ones we know, but, other characters who kind of float through, keep saying, "Oh, I'm sure they're all right. I'm sure my family's fine." And I was sort of thinking all through it, well, on what evidence would you ever have that anyone you know would be fine in this
exactly.
situation?
You would have no idea with all the phones down.
Yeah.
One thing mentioned in the last episode was that the fountain had been turned off, so that's probably good. Otherwise, they would have probably had water everywhere.
Yeah.
That may have been a production thing. They realized it would be way too expensive to have water spewing all over the set.
Yeah.
As well as all the earthquake stuff.
And not needed.
Probably dangerous too. Didn't add anything to it. At the Lockridge house, Brick, Lakin, and Minx are in the living room when the trembling starts, and Minx says, "Oh, this is nothing like 25, but you 2 better get under the table, but I'm not afraid of earthquakes." So, after the earthquake, Lakin and Brick are searching the downstairs area, and they can't find Minx. And then they hear a voice, "Let me out of here, let me out of here!" And she's hidden herself in the sarcophagus, which has saved her life.
And happens to be a perfect fit for her.
Yes. That's maybe a little gag of Lionel's. So she says maybe they could. Says if I'd expired in there, it would have saved you all the trouble of burying me. So the next batch of people is let's go to the cemetery. So Eden is scared of the earthquake. She doesn't really want Lionel to leave her, but he rushes off to find Augusta. And the earth is shaking apart, and the earth and grass and stuff coming up, and the earth is splitting. Anyway, Sophia's coffin ends up being exposed, and Eden says it's empty, which of course she knew because her mom was lost at sea. But I guess she had kind of forgotten about that over the years, and it was kind of like harsh reality that her mother's body was never found.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, Augusta did fall down the cliff, and that's one of the things I remembered from when I was a kid. I remembered Augusta falling down a cliff. I remembered Minx popping out of the sarcophagus. I remembered several people riding horses, which I didn't remember were Ted and Warren.
Mm-hmm.
So Lionel climbs down, and we see a lot of close-ups of him kind of on some shale, but then we see one really precarious-looking shot of him halfway up this cliff, climbing towards Augusta, who's holding onto a branch. So that looked kind of a dangerous stunt for Nick Coster.
Well, there were also several stunt people. If you see the credits at the end, there were
3 stunt people listed.
So there might have been some stunt doubles used in this.
I don't know. I thought that was Nick Coster, but then I don't know. Maybe it was a very clever camera work. So yeah, that was pretty impressive. So he spends much of the episode climbing down to her, and he gets to her, and they hug, and then suddenly there's an aftershock, and they both go tumbling down the rest of the cliff.
Now, I have to say, I did sort of wonder when he finally reached her, and they sort of embrace, how that was helping her, because it seemed like she was responsible for his full weight on that slender branch as well.
I think maybe he had a foothold.
Yeah, he must have.
So Lakin visits the Capwells, probably looking for Warren and Ted. She runs into Eden, and Warren and Ted aren't there, so she says, "Oh, I think Warren and Ted are together." And then Eden says, "Oh, I saw your parents at the cemetery." Then I left. Couldn't find them afterwards, but I just left. So Lakin's not too happy that she left them after she specifically noticed they were missing. So
yeah, so you can see that we haven't really had any scenes between Lakin and Eden so far. This is their
first scene, I think.
And they probably, I wouldn't have thought their paths would have crossed too much before this, because there is a bit of an age difference, and Eden's been off in Europe for the last few years. But so they know each other, but you can tell that Lakin isn't really that impressed with Eden's priorities during this disaster. I mean, not only did she just kind of let Lionel and Augusta go off and not really bother to look for them, but she doesn't, at this point, doesn't seem to be really jumping on the Ted and Warren thing either.
Yeah. Joe Perkins is in the back of a police car being driven to San Quentin, and one of the police officers decides to put some music on. People in soap operas only ever decide to put music on when there's about to be an important newscast, and in this case, an earthquake is announced. And all cars are directed to come back to help. And they run into, I don't know, maybe a fissure or something. It's actually not clear what caused them to go off the road, because the next thing you see, the car's off the road, the 2 police officers are unconscious, gas is leaking, so Joe smells the gas. He can reach the pocket of one of the officers to get the key to undo his handcuffs, and he manages to get them out. Luckily, it's not one of those police cars that has a barrier between the back and the front seat. Otherwise, Joe would have been just trapped there. So he gets the first one out, and then the fire starts, and the second one's leg is jammed, but he gets him out too. And then he says, "Okay, I'm going to Santa Barbara," and he just starts walking. Yeah. And the one police officer does raise his gun at one point, but Joe doesn't stop, and they decide to let him go.
Yeah. I think he, when you think about the relationship he was having with these 2 police officers before the quake and at the end of the last episode, they were kind of mocking him and were kind of slagging him off and were very disrespectful. And now I think since he saved their lives, he has earned a bit of respect from them. And they just let him go.
Seems like Dame Witherspoon might have been better suited to that last bit.
Maybe.
So we see at one point a newscaster that we haven't seen before, KSB, I think is the station, and she's doing some weather, and the earthquake hits. Then later we see a radio announcer who's got a broken window, but is reading tips to people on what to do after the quake, and one of them is to look for broken gas lines. So hopefully the Andrade's gas is actually not going to catch fire. At the Perkins house, they get off pretty easy.
Yeah.
Amy and Marissa actually start taking in strangers who are wandering by, who got separated from their families. A woman comes in with some random kid that she found wandering, and the neighbor is injured, and he comes in, and his kids. So Jade eventually arrives, and they just wonder how John and Joe are doing, because John hasn't arrived yet, and Joe's got a long walk back.
I actually have to say that I think the Perkins, not only did they get off better, relatively speaking, than some of the others, but they seem to be handling it in a much more pragmatic way than some of the others too. So they try to find, there a lot of stuff isn't working. The electricity's gone, the radio's dead, so they decide to try the radio in the car, and then their radio in their house starts working. And, Marissa is kind of going through the checklist of what they announce on the radio, and they're making sure their gas is off and doing all the right things, and then they're taking in the neighbors. If you contrast this with the Capwell reaction, where Cece's sort of wandering around dazed through the ruins of his house,
Minx does tell Brick after they're all safe to go and check with the neighbors to see if they need any help.
Yes.
And that's when Lakin goes over to the Capwells. Now Dominic starts the day, or 4:21 p.m., taking off her disguise, and she's actually in her underwear. And suddenly the earthquake happens, and she yanks open the door to run out. And Kelly Capwell is just coming down the hallway, and she quickly covers her face with both hands so Kelly doesn't recognize her. And Kelly basically chases her through the building. They end up in the basement, and she's like, "Why won't you let me see who you are?" Says it's too soon, and I've spent all these years watching the Capwells, and they can't find out who I am. And anyway, they go deep into the basement, and
it seemed like the worst place to be in an earthquake. But...
And then the aftershock causes the ceiling to collapse in. So both Kelly and Dominic are trapped under a pile of possibly the whole building.
And if you just think about the logistics of Dominic running through this building, down these stairs, through a basement during an earthquake in your negligee like this the whole time, actually takes a certain amount of coordination.
Yeah, but I wonder if she'll manage to get out of that building without Kelly seeing her face. All right, that does it for episode 1 of The Earthquake. Now, who didn't we see? We didn't see Summer, we didn't see John, we didn't see Veronica, we didn't see Peter, and we didn't see Mr. Bottoms.
Yeah.
I think that's everyone that wasn't in this episode. So,
but we'll see more of the aftermath.
Yeah, I mean, we may even see, I don't know, they might even show us what some of those other people were doing. Well, Peter's in the hospital. John had just left the police station. Summer, you said, might be with Gina. Mr. Bottoms, he's probably... Well, it's probably... what's it called? Not Remembrance Day in the States, but
Veterans Day.
Veterans Day. Do they have the holiday on the Monday if the 11th falls on a Sunday? So he might... He could be at the school, or...
Could be at a military parade.
Could be at a plant.
Yeah.
Could be at a plant show.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we may find out when we watch episode 77.
Yeah.
See you then.
See ya.
Hello, and welcome back.
Hello.
We finished watching episode 77 of Santa Barbara. Summer and Gina are together in Los Angeles, and they are watching the UBS News Report, which has some reporters live in Santa Barbara.
And it's kind of fun watching this episode and realizing that it predates 24-hour news channels. So this would have been a time when a live newscast would have really been something special. It wouldn't have been done very often, and only for something really important.
Well, it seems like LA, didn't have any after effects of the quake, which is good. Gina tries throughout the day, as they watch this day-long coverage, Gina tries to figure out how she can get to Brandon. She can't get through to him on the phone. She calls the highway patrol, as if they could do something, and then they actually warn her and say, we've been arresting people who try to drive to Santa Barbara. So don't think about that. And
that makes sense, actually, because not only is there a crisis there, and people are actually in immediate danger with the buildings being so structurally unsound and everything, but having all these people come in, it just stretches the resources even further. So you can see why they don't want anyone coming in at all.
So eventually there's a knock on the door, and it's CC's helicopter pilot. He's come for Gina.
Yes.
And he says, Santana and Brandon are okay, or Brandon's okay. And then Summer tags along as well.
Yeah.
The UBS network is reporting live from the lobby of the Capwell Hotel, which I don't know if we've really seen that lobby before. I think we've seen maybe the lobby elevator, like when Gina or Peter has gone into it. But I don't think we've seen that big lobby space before.
No, and to be honest, we don't really get a great sense of it here either.
No.
Because it's not being really used as a hotel lobby.
It's filled with stretchers of people because it's also a makeshift hospital. And there appear to be like big holes in the front wall out to the street, as far as I can tell. I don't know if that's what it looked like to you. So the reporter mentions that President Reagan was not at his ranch during the earthquake. Cece shows up, and he's interviewed about the oil specifically and the risk to the shore, and he says that the cutoff valves of the offshore rigs work perfectly, so they don't have anything to worry about there. Cruz and Eden run into each other, but they failed to notice John Perkins being carried by on a stretcher.
Would they have known John Perkins, though? I mean, maybe Cruz would have.
Maybe Cruz would have if Joe was his friend.
I mean, he might have seen him at the funeral.
Eden would. Well, I don't know. He works for the Capwells.
Yeah.
So
that's
Cruz
true.
would probably know him from that too. Then, so I guess John Perkins had left Joe at the police station. Said he was going to get a lawyer. So he might have been in the downtown core, visiting that lawyer friend, which would explain why he was downtown near the Capwell Hotel. So Eden blames Cruz for the earthquake, for not warning them adamantly enough about it, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
And then the reporters just interview doctors and victims throughout the day. So it's a day-long thing. They keep cutting back to the Capwell Hotel. Warren gives up digging for Ted at one point and is thinking of leaving on his horse. Then he goes back and continues to dig, and then he spots Ted moving through the gap and gets all the way through to him, manages to drag him to the entrance, and then Ted's kind of groggily helping at this point, and he pulls him out just as an aftershock completely buries the cave.
Yeah.
So he just barely got Ted out in time.
Yeah.
So he puts Ted on his horse, and they ride back, presumably to the Lockridge stables.
Yeah, and certainly when Ted sort of comes around and he and Warren are climbing onto the one horse that's left. I guess Ted's horse has run off somewhere. There is there is a warmth there, when you consider that they were ferociously sort of fighting in that up until the moment of the earthquake. And, now I think Ted is just so grateful to Warren for saving his life, and Warren is glad that Ted's alive, so it's a very different vibe between them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Lionel and Augusta fall what looks like quite a distance, and at first it looks like they're on a cliff. Later on in the episode, it looks like they're in a cave, so I don't know if they've slid further from an aftershock.
But then, even then, they are talking about being on a ledge, so it's very hard to tell where they are.
Yeah, because Augusta was calling up to the street to get people to help, and when she was hanging off that cliff, we saw way, way down below.
Yeah,
there was a car parked, so there must be another road at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be easier to call down to whoever's car that was.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think it was Augusta or Lionel's, because that means that would have been quite a climb to that cemetery. So, anyway, they seem trapped. Lionel gets knocked unconscious at one point by one of the aftershocks, and when he wakes up, he just feels he just needs to tell Augusta everything. So he tells her that he had an affair with Sophia, that he was infatuated with Eden, and that the ghost of Sophia is haunting him. It's a little too much for Augusta all at once, I think.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because this is, in many ways, a huge reveal. I mean, we've kind of guessed a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely is something that the show's been leading up to. But the reveal to Augusta is a bit anticlimactic, and I don't know if it's because they're both so shaken up by the earthquake, or if this speaks to the nature of their marriage, which seems to be very unconventional in a lot of ways. But Augusta doesn't really seem shocked by this.
Mm-hmm.
And she doesn't seem to be in a place where she wants to really discuss it very much.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't really... I mean, it's fairly rapid fire, but she doesn't have any comebacks other than stop talking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't know if she knew about Sophia. That was a long time ago, and he said that after Augusta came back or something, he and Sophia saw each other a few times later, and it wasn't the same or something like that. So that was a bit of stuff that we hadn't heard about before.
So maybe he and Augusta were on a break, or as I say, they seem to have a fairly unconventional marriage. So maybe they have a marriage where one of them wanders off intermittently for a while. I mean, we've just seen Lionel come back from a long sojourn off somewhere. So.
Well, he had said it was when he was a consultant in Hollywood, and so that the affair happened in L.A.
Yeah.
And then later in Santa Barbara, things weren't the same between them. So maybe it was when they got back. Maybe that was it.
Maybe.
An aftershock causes the gas line in the Andrade house to snap. And so the gas starts pouring out into the house, which is where Santana and Brandon are. Santana starts lighting candles as evening approaches, and Ruben and Danny arrive. Danny goes to find his flashlight. He wants to go to the high school to volunteer with search parties, so he leaves. And then, Santana, having a think about life, as everyone in the earthquake seems to be doing, tells Ruben that Brandon is her son, and Brandon is his grandson. And Ruben is angry that Santana lied to him. Also, he throws in, I raised you to, believe in marriage, and etc., etc. But he also says he's angry at C.C. Capwell, his employer and friend, for... Santana tells him about that Cece was responsible for having her give up the baby and adopting it out to Gina. So Ruben's angry with Cece finally. Yeah. Because he's been kind of a jerk, probably for decades.
Yeah. I think, I think Ruben's probably seen Cece be a jerk for decades. as part of business and to other people. This is very personal. And I think Ruben's probably a bit shocked that CC
would do something to his family.
To his family after all their years of service and being so close to the family.
Which is interesting considering a future storyline that occurs between the Andrades and the Capwells. So we were discussing what would happen as a result of the gas leak. So Brandon and Santana are shown to be asleep as the gas is leaking. Now, I'm thinking that they would end up suffocating because the gas is displacing the oxygen. It wouldn't explode from a candle because it needs a spark of a certain heat, I think, to ignite. Though if a room is filling with gas and it reaches a flame, I'm not sure if it would start to burn. And so Diane thought we should start a new segment called Ask the Expert. So we're going to call an expert now and find out what would happen.
Hello.
Hi, Puppy. It's Misha.
Hi, Misha. Na, wie geht's?
Good. We're just doing our podcast.
Yeah?
And we had a question that we need to ask an expert the answer to.
Yeah?
So we on our show, there was a gas pipe broke in a kitchen.
Yes?
And the people in the house didn't notice it. So they were going about their day. And for some reason they didn't smell it. That's never explained why. But it's getting evening, so they light a candle. And then they fall asleep.
Yeah?
So what would happen in a house, just a small house, like a 1-room, 2-room house, as the gas is leaking into the house, when the gas reaches the candle, would it catch fire at all?
If there wasn't enough gas in a room while the candle was burning, then it would just ignite. But if the room would be full of gas and then the light comes on, then it would be more like a blast.
Well, no, they lit the candles earlier in the day, and so the candle is already lit, and it's in the living room, and the kitchen is right next to it where the gas is leaking. But it would seep through the house. Like, would they pass out from the gas? Like,
eventually, yeah.
And then if it hit the candle, would it burn at all though when it reached the candle, or needs to be just a right mixture?
Need a certain mixture before it would ignite.
Oh, okay.
So it depends how hot the candle was burning and how much gas was coming in the room. So, you have a big room. That little gas that comes in very slowly is probably not enough to ignite until the room fills up.
So by then they would have suffocated from all that gas if they were asleep.
Well, obviously
We'll see if it explodes or not. But we don't expect it would explode in the real world, probably. It would just ignite. Although I guess if it ignites in a small space, that would cause a bang.
Well, yeah, there would be a little compression happening there. But because it's not contained in a small area, so the explosion could expand easier than being more contained or so.
I see.
But the explosion only would have to occur with more gas coming in, or not even igniting, because once you're come to the point, there would be just an instant flame.
Thanks for the expert advice.
Okay.
Thank you for calling.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
So there you have it. The gas will just burn. Now Lincoln is looking all over town for her missing parents, for Ted, for Warren. She's just wandering from one place to another, not having much luck.
She's kind of getting more and more upset, as one would in that situation.
So she winds up at the Capel Hotel, where she knows that people have been taken there who are injured, and she looks around there a bit. And then then she goes to the Capwell mansion and looks there and runs into Cece. Let's do that again. So then she goes to the Capwell mansion where she runs into Cece and I think Mason.
Mm-hmm.
And they haven't seen Tad or Warren or Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And Cece asks if Minx is okay.
Yeah.
And Lakin says yes. And Cece says, of course she is. She's indestructible. So Lakin's had no luck this episode finding any of her family.
Yeah.
Kelly and Dominic are both trapped in different rooms in the basement of Dominic's apartment building.
Yeah.
They call to each other and both are conscious.
Mm-hmm.
Seem to be okay, just trapped under heavy weight. Dominic's got some bricks on her, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then suddenly then they're talking a little bit about everything, and Kelly asks if she'll come forward and clear Joe.
Yeah.
And she says that she will.
Yeah.
So I think once they're rescued, Dominic, is probably going to try and clear Joe. So then they hear Joe's voice.
Mm-hmm.
And they call to him, and he comes downstairs and moves some very light-looking and feeling debris, I think. And that's, he's about to enter the room where Kelly is, I think.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, how did Joe find them at first? And then having thought it over, I thought, well, where else would he go? He can't go to the Perkins house because the police will look for him there. He can't go to Sally's place. The police will look for him there because he's like a double fugitive now. The only place he could go where no one would know about is Dominic's place. So,
And also he knows, from the events of the last couple episodes that Dominic's signature Dominic's note was forged by Peter. So I imagine he would want to go and talk to Dominic and just, maybe find out what's going on.
Mm-hmm. And I guess, even knowing there's been an earthquake,
Yeah.
I guess he would assume that Kelly and Dominic could figure out that the only place he could go is Dominic's.
Yeah.
And even if there was a collapse or something, they'd still meet at that building. So
Yeah.
I think it makes sense that he went there. And I guess not finding Dominic in her apartment, just search the building.
Yeah.
So I doubt that the basement was the first place he looked, but he eventually made it down there. Now, over at the Perkins house, Jade and Amy want to go and look for Dad.
Mm-hmm.
Marissa tells them not to. And then Brick comes over to check on Amy.
Yeah.
And starts kissing her.
Yeah.
No reason.
Little romantic interlude between Amy and Brick.
And then Marissa snaps and says, okay, Brick, you watch the girls. I'm going out to look for John.
Yeah.
So she's even though she's been telling Jade and Amy John knows what he's doing, they're like, no, he would come straight home,
Yeah. It's interesting how completely not impressed Jade and Marissa are by this little romantic scene between Amy and Brick. And, I think it's partly because they've just been through this terrible earthquake and they're worried about John. I mean, I'm sure under more normal circumstances they would be happy that Amy's moving on from the creep she was with before, but, they're really not having any of it right now. This is just
it's
another...
not really the time to focus on it.
Yeah.
Just like Augusta with Lionel's confession. It's like, can we deal with this other thing first?
Yeah.
So Marissa makes her way to the Capwell Hotel and asks some people if they've seen John Perkins, and a Red Cross nurse has him on a list that he's there, and she brings him to John, and he's lying there just on a couch in the lobby, staring up at the sky, not really looking too well at all. And he says things like, "Oh, I hung on till you could come. I knew you'd come, and I'm not going to pull through." And, he says he's happy that he got to reconcile with Joe and that they got back together, and talks about how She's the best thing that ever happened to him, and then he dies.
Yeah.
So we have our first death on Santa Barbara. I mean, Channing died before the show. Sophia died way before the show. He's our first real on-screen death.
And you keep asking me which character is going to leave next.
Yeah,
and I had
you were sticking with Summer. You
I had,
didn't go back
but I
to
had
John.
identified John at one point.
You had John and Joe and Summer, I think. So
I was sort of
just
half
in the
right
wrong places.
Yeah, John is gone. The character is gone, and so is the actor. Joe is partially gone. We've seen the exit of the original actor to play him. We've got a new actor. And Summer's still hanging on. So, there you go.
Well, I guess I'll ask you now before I forget, who do you think will be the next to go?
Character or actor or...
I guess actor.
Actor. Well, I think it's too early to replace our CC.
But it's not necessarily a replacement. I mean, if they die, the actor goes too, right?
That's true. Well, Peter wasn't looking that great when we saw him being toted off to the hospital. So I'm going to guess Peter, which makes me very sad because I really love the scenes between Peter and Mason.
Well, we didn't see Peter again this episode. We didn't see Mr. Bottoms.
Yeah.
We haven't seen Sally Taylor, neither of the last two.
No.
I think those are the 3 unaccounted for cast members, other than Veronica, who's still out of town, we assume.
Yeah.
So there could still be some shocks for those 3 characters revealed.
That's true. We don't know if Sally's made it through.
And it's still possible Lionel and or Augusta could die, and Kelly and or Dominic could die, because things could keep collapsing on them. And a crevice might open up and swallow Warren and Ted.
But
and there could still be aftershocks.
They all have storylines.
Santana and Brandon might blow up.
Yes.
Even though that wouldn't happen in the real world.
Well, I mean, they could all just go in the next aftershock, and then we'd have a whole new cast.
CC and Mason could get some masonry fall on them at the Capwell house. Yeah, actually, everyone's still in jeopardy because there could be aftershocks. Although the seismologist did say that the longer it is, without a tsunami, the less the chances are that there'll be one. So maybe we don't have to worry about that part. And I think if I were to think of the budget of a soap opera, I would really feel like we don't have to worry about a tsunami.
Yeah.
Because they did some pretty cool stuff, during the earthquake effects, like just throwing things, pottery around and knocking things over.
Now, mind you, you can see that this show, which probably wasn't one of the top soap operas, even back then, does have a much more lavish budget than a lot of the current soap operas. I mean, if you watch Days of Our Lives, they don't ever really go off set. So just the fact that they've splurged to do some actual outdoor scenes is pretty impressive by a lot of the standards you have today.
I think there was a time in the 80s and maybe 90s when the soaps would go on location 4 times a year during the sweeps and have lavish things, lavish weddings in foreign countries and things like that. But the money's definitely not there now with only 200,000 viewers, of a show.
Yeah.
That's not going to pay for anything.
It was a really big deal, I think it was last year, when Young and the Restless went to LA and actually did some on-location shots in Los Angeles. And that was sort of heralded as an event. So it's not quite as common, definitely, as it was.
Days of Our Lives did some location shooting a couple years ago, and it was basically just 2 characters at the beach in LA, which is, obviously a few miles from Burbank, but not really an exotic location.
Yeah.
So, All right. Well, I'm looking forward to watching episode 78. We'll see if there are any more injuries or deaths revealed from the past quakes or forthcoming with aftershocks.
Yeah, and I'm really interested to see if they'll do any more sort of, I would almost call it experimental storytelling, because one of the things I've really loved about these two episodes is they're really playing around with the formula a lot. So last time, and we talked about it, they do this wonderful thing where they show, here's what was going on at 421, here's what's going on at 422 when the earthquake hits. And it was really a beautiful way to do a reprise, which they do every episode, and have it be a natural part of the storyline. So that was really nice.
And they managed to stretch out a 40-second earthquake into like about 10 minutes of footage of things being destroyed. Yeah. Which, if they showed that all at once in one continuous sequence of things falling apart, it couldn't have worked, you know. Yeah, and then with this episode today, we have it sort of framed by a newscast, and we have this on-site news correspondent there who intermittently cuts in and interviews various characters. So that's kind of a neat, that's a really different touch as well. And I can't be entirely sure, but it almost seemed to me like a lot of that, this last episode played out in real time as well. Yep, we will see if they continue to play with the format in this episode. Yeah. We'll see in a few minutes after we watch episode 78 of Santa Barbara. See ya.
This week's spotlight is on Robert Allen Browne, who played John Perkins, father of wrongly accused Joe Perkins, on Santa Barbara. Robert Allen Browne was born on June 2nd, 1932, in New York, New York. He and his wife, Marjorie Stapp, had one child. Browne's first credit is the 1965 movie Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster as Martian crew member, followed in 1969 as Bob in The Mummy and the Curse of the Jackals. Before Santa Barbara, he appeared in shows like The Incredible Hulk, Dallas, MASH, and The Greatest American Hero, as well as several movies, including Psycho 2. Beginning with Episode 1, Browne appeared in 24 episodes of Santa Barbara as John Perkins. His time on the show ended in Episode 77, when John succumbed to injuries resulting from Santa Barbara's big earthquake, thus becoming the first character to die on screen. After Santa Barbara, Browne appeared in Three's a Crowd, Moonlighting, L.A. Law, Heart of the City, and Columbo, as well as reprising his role as Ralph Statler in Psycho 3. Browne's final credit is a 2010 video called Golf Millions. He passed away on June 12, 2018, at the age of 86 in Laguna Woods, California.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've watched episode 78 of Santa Barbara, originally aired the 14th of November, 1984. Ted, Eden, Cece, and Mason arrive at the Capwell Hotel, where the USB is still doing a live broadcast. Ted mentions that he and Warren were horseback riding. Cruz says that he checked out the cemetery and saw a rock slide nearby, but was not able to get to it. Warren is worried people think he's a hero for saving Ted. Ted says that he's not going to drop anything. Lakin finally finds Ted. And then Cece asks Cruz if there's any news of Kelly. Eden threatens to blow his cover if he doesn't bring in his Cub Scout troop, as she says, in front of Cece, to help find Kelly. And later, Cruz finally gets word that they found Kelly's car.
So any good feeling between Warren and Ted after, Warren rescuing Ted is sort of evaporated now that they've gotten back into the city and are safely out of that cave.
But I guess the coins are buried, right? So
yeah,
at least there's no evidence.
That's right. So Ted may still be pursuing it, but really with the coins buried under a mountain, there's not going to be much evidence for his investigation.
Mm-hmm. Santana wakes up and realizes something's wrong. I guess they still don't smell gas, but she's groggy from it.
Mm-hmm.
She can't wake Brandon, so she tries to carry him out, but she collapses before she can get out. Mason arrives, and when they won't answer the door, he looks into the window and sees they're both lying on the floor in the living room. So he breaks in and pulls them out.
Yes.
They can't manage to wake Brandon, so they get him to the hospital. And the doctors managed to revive him and said that he was 5 minutes away from death.
Yeah, very scary.
So once again, Santana's really indebted to Mason.
Yeah.
And, the doctor asks if Santana's the boy's mother, and in front of Mason, she says, no, the mother's in L.A., so I don't know if she would have answered yes if she were alone.
Yeah, I don't know how much not put that behind her, but how much she's accepted Gina's role in things.
Mm-hmm. While Mason's there, he decides to check on Peter Flint, and Peter apparently has a 50% chance of pulling through.
Mm-hmm.
So he goes to see him, and Peter's kind of delirious and is going on about how he has to tell Kelly about the night Channing died.
Yeah.
So Mason says he'll be back with Kelly.
Yes.
Now, I think he's going to come back with Santana Andrade in a wig so that he can trick a delirious Peter into confessing to something.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he does something like that, because if Peter's only got a 50-50 chance, it's not even certain that he's going to be coherent, even if he's alive for a little bit longer. You know, if things take a downturn, they may not have many opportunities to talk to him.
Mm-hmm.
If things take an upturn, he may decide he's not going to say anything after all.
It's interesting Mason is interested in hearing about this, because I think he still thinks Joe is the one who killed Channing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. Maybe did he and Kelly talk after Peter was taken to the hospital? Maybe Kelly said that he knows something about who killed Channing.
Well, it's also even possible from the other perspective that, you know, with Joe back in trouble again, as far as Mason is concerned, he probably doesn't, you know, there's so much happening. He may not know that Joe's escaped, but regardless, with kind of Joe back in custody as far as he knows, he may want it to stick this time. Maybe he feels that Peter can give him more evidence against Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Peter hasn't actually told Mason or anyone except Joe that he knows that Joe is innocent.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Ruben and Rosa are at the Capel Hotel also, and Ruben is angry with Rosa for hiding Santana's secret from him, and she said, I only knew it for a little while, and then he says that Cece will have to answer for everything he does. So he's no longer on board with Cece being his friend, I think. And then Ruben wants to go and compliment Santana for standing up to Cece.
Yeah.
So he goes home, and the house is dark. They don't realize anything's wrong. I guess they don't see the broken window. So he goes in, and he finds some matches, and lights a match, and then he pulls back the curtain to the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess this is where the gas is built up that our expert said would be needed for an explosion.
Mm-hmm.
And as he pulls the curtain, the gas explodes and pushes Ruben across the room, throws him across the room.
Yeah.
And Rosa helps him up, but just then there's another aftershock, and things fall on them, and they get hit again.
Mm-hmm.
And she pulls Ruben out to the very large porch that they have, almost like a deck, and he's in quite a bad state, and so she prays that he won't die. and some neighbors come and help her get him to the doctor. And the doctor says he's got internal bleeding and he needs to be prepped for the OR immediately.
Yeah.
So we might be losing two patriarchs this week.
And actually, I was just thinking as you were giving that summary, there are actually a lot of parallels between John Perkins and Reuben in that they both have kids who they maybe didn't trust as fully as they should have. And they both are regretting that, and they have both suffered very personally in this earthquake.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's necessarily particularly meaningful, but it's just there is a lot of symmetry between the two characters.
And on John's end, they kind of wrapped up his story, had him make up with Joe and get back together with Marissa, so he had some closure.
Mm-hmm.
And with Reuben, now he's found out about his grandson, and so they may have had that happen because they plan to kill him off the next day.
Mm-hmm.
So. Lionel and Augusta are in their cliff/pit, and they light a fire to stay warm, and Lionel and Augusta talk about that year that Lionel had the affair with Sophia, and I guess Lionel and Augusta had argued about having kids. Lionel wanted kids right away.
Mm-hmm.
Augusta wanted to wait a few years, and she had gone off angry with her mother and left town.
Yeah.
And Lionel, met Sophia that summer and wanted some company, and Augusta asks him if he loved Sophia, and he said not in the same way as you.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm.
And then he says that he was there when she died, that he was on the boat, and then we have a flashback, and we actually see an actress portraying Sophia now, where we see her
Sophia's face, yeah.
And it's the same voice we've heard the last few days after they stopped using Eden, or Marcy Walker, as young Sophia. And so now we know what Sophia looks like, finally.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the same actress that played her in that one newspaper photo.
No.
So that's interesting.
Recast.
She's got a lot of blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
And, he says that he had wanted her, I think, to run away with him. And she, I guess, said, no, I'm going to Cece.
Yeah.
And she was sort of sitting on the edge of the speedboat, and he went to touch her, and she fell backward off the boat.
Yeah.
And then he goes to grab the throttle to stop the boat, to turn it around, and I guess he accidentally hit it. It went forward instead, and it threw him back, and he hit his head and got knocked out. So by the time he regained his senses, the boat was just spinning around in circles, and he says he heard a thud. I guess that sounded like he thought he had hit Sophia and knocked her out. And he kept looking for her for a long time and couldn't find her. And then he went back to shore and then just kind of numbly, in a daze, didn't report it to anyone and just, was in shock over it. And then he said that's why he started leaving town all the time, to run away from that, hoping that it would, the memory of that would go away.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
So it's explained really a lot of Lionel's behavior for the last 20 years, 24 years.
It really fills in a lot of that whole backstory that we've been slowly trying to put together ourselves. Now, we don't know what, if any, connection this has with the coins, apart from the fact that the coins were Sophia's. But it does confirm what we suspected about Lionel having had an affair with Sophia. And from the way Lionel tells it, the bulk of this affair was in Los Angeles during that summer when he was on contract, and Sophia was in a movie. That when they both got back to Santa Barbara, and I guess she was at CC, the affair really started to wither and die. It just wasn't the same.
And even after telling that story, Augusta thinks that Lionel pushed Sophia on purpose, and he has to swear to her again, no, it was an accident.
Yeah.
And then he tells her that he thought Eden was pretending to be Sophia. So they're in a pit, and it's cold, and it's nighttime.
Yeah.
Joe finds Kelly in the basement of Dominic's building, but then the ceiling collapses.
Yeah.
And blocks the stairs. Kelly is trapped under a new pile of rubble. And she comes to, and she thinks she's going to die. So she says she wants to marry Joe there and then. So they use one of her earrings as a ring and kind of remember bits and pieces of the wedding ceremony and sort of perform it themselves, with Dominic listening in the next room, because Dominic's also trapped under a pile of rubble. And then, at the end of the ceremony, Dominic cries, and she moves her head into the light, and we see it's the same actress who's played Sophia. Dominic is Sophia.
I know.
She says, "It's my daughter. It's my little Kelly."
Shocking.
That is a shock. That Dominic is the twin of Sophia. So there we have it. I don't know how long ago you guessed that Dominic is probably Sophia, but you were correct.
Yes.
And now that may explain why Judith McConnell is on this Santa Barbara cruise.
So that'll be fun.
So we just heard that Augusta is not going to be there.
No, she's got an offer. So,
but Lionel and Sophia will be there.
I have to say, I did find it a little bit amusing during this very passionate wedding scene between Joe and Kelly. And as you say, Kelly uses her earring as a ring. And at one point she says to Joe, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have one for you." And she's literally got the other earring
on the left ear facing the camera.
Which I'm sure Joe could have shoved over his pinky finger.
I think he probably glossed over that on purpose.
Yeah.
To be a bit pedantic. If Kelly's about to die. So we'll find out when we watch episode 79 if Kelly dies, if Dominic dies, if Reuben dies, if Peter dies, if Joe gets out of that basement that has no stairs. We'll find out where Sally Taylor is, maybe.
Maybe.
We'll find out how Mr. Bottoms survived the earthquake or not.
Find out if Peter tells us much more.
If Peter knows who killed Channing.
Yeah.
And find out if Summer and Gina make it to Santa Barbara. And what, if anything, Ted can do about Warren now that the coins are gone. So we'll be back after we watch episode 79.
See ya.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've finished episode 79 of Santa Barbara, which originally aired November 15th, 1984. Augusta tells Lionel that she met a man in Rome 23 years ago when he was having an affair with Sophia. She and her mother had gone to Rome, and she met a man named Giancarlo. And a rescuer arrives, and they ask him to contact Lincoln and Warren. He returns with a rope and tells them that their children are safe. And Augusta climbs up, followed by Lionel. So, not much more than climbing happened in this episode, but they had a little bit of finished up the discussion about 23 years ago.
Yeah.
Ted tells Lakin he's happy she's in his life. And then Cece tells Eden they found Kelly. A Red Cross worker reports to Lakin that someone has found her parents on a cliff.
Yeah.
That's pretty straightforward. The doctor also says to Rosa that Reuben will be all right. So instead of dying like John Perkins at the end of the last episode, it basically started with Reuben out of the OR and he's going to be fine.
So we're going to have Reuben as part of the story for a little bit longer.
I should think so. Brandon asks Mason who Channing is. he had overheard Cece saying to Santana that Channing had made a big mistake.
Mm-hmm.
So this has got Mason thinking, "Ooh, something negative about Channing.
Mm-hmm.
I better follow up on this somehow."
And I have to say, this whole scene with Brandon and Mason and Santana sort of threw me a little bit, because they're actually back in Santana's apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really surprised by that, because the last time we saw Brandon, he was near death in the hospital. But I guess he made a fairly quick recovery, and they've let Santana take him home.
Mm-hmm.
And Mason has come with them. And Santana and Brandon are flaked out on her bed, I guess. And Mason is asleep on a chair.
Mm-hmm. Cece arrives to take Santana to tell them that the Andrade house exploded.
Yeah.
And he takes Santana to the hospital. So Mason's trying to find something for Brandon to drink. There's no water in the taps. He finds some warm orange juice, so they have that. Gina arrives.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't ask how Rosa is, which is odd, since that was who she was on the phone with when the earthquake started.
Mm-hmm.
Then Santana returns, and Mason tells her that Gina took Brandon already.
Yeah.
So she says, "Oh, I didn't even have time to say goodbye to him."
Yeah.
And then Mason asks her to marry him,
Mm-hmm.
which I think surprises Santana somewhat.
Mm-hmm.
And she says that she doesn't have time to the ability to think right now, because her head's swimming, so she doesn't have to answer right away.
Yeah, I could see where, we don't quite know where her feelings are right now for Mason, and perhaps she doesn't either. But it has been a lot this last 24 hours, what with the earthquake, and she and Brandon she and Cece having a huge fight, and then she and Brandon almost dying, and then her dad
father
almost dying, and now she's suddenly back in her house, which of course is a wreck from the earthquake, and Mason's asking her to marry him.
Mm-hmm.
So I think her choice of deferring it is a really good one.
Yeah, I think she needs some time to recuperate from that day. Earlier in the episode, when Cece had arrived, Mason made a point of kissing Santana in front of him.
Yes, just to kind of, and you could see Cece wasn't really thrilled with that.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, and kind of what the different motivations are as well. Certainly Mason and Santana seem to be developing at least a certain amount of simpatico between them. Mason, of course, doesn't know Santana's secret. Santana may still calculate this keeps her closer to Brandon, especially if Gina is going to be staying at the Capwell house.
Mm-hmm.
Mason may be calculating that it's a bit of a way to get back at his dad, and I think is perhaps prompted in this by the mention of Channing, which always seems to set him off.
Mm-hmm.
So there's possibly lots of undercurrents with this as well.
And I think, unless they backtrack a bit, it seems like Santana's resigned to the fact that Gina's Brandon's mother.
Yes.
She never stated it to anyone.
No.
But I always assumed, maybe from the original trailers, that she was going to try to get full custody of Brandon. Maybe in the back of her head. And now I think probably she'd be fine with what she actually did state she was after, just to see him. So we'll see if that's something that changes, or if she tries to go after Brandon once her head's cleared a bit.
And I think one potential wild card in this is Reuben, who is really upset that, he has this grandchild, and he doesn't get to have any relationship with the child. He doesn't get to acknowledge it as his at all.
Yeah, and Cece's been seeing him for 6 years.
Exactly, and Cece is actively involved in directing the boy's life, so there's quite a difference there. And so I think Reuben might might stir things up a little bit.
I'd like to see that, actually.
Yeah.
Back in the collapsed building, Kelly is delirious.
Mm-hmm.
She wonders why Channing is against them. So then Joe tells her, no, it's 6 years later.
Yeah.
Cruz arrives, then Cece, and they help dig Kelly out. The paramedics take Kelly out, and Joe rides with them. Cece's pretty quiet about the fact that Joe's there the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
Then Cruz digs for Dominic. When he finally breaks through, Dominic has vanished.
Yeah, Dominic's made his
There's
escape.
a little shaft of sunlight that we see. And then we see Sophia back in her apartment.
Yeah.
And she's looking for the appropriate disguise to go to the hospital to see how Kelly's doing.
Yeah.
At the Perkins house, Marissa arrives to tell Jade and Amy the bad news that their father has died.
Yeah.
And a Red Cross worker shows up to bring them news that Joe has been found. So they are told to meet Joe at the hospital. At the hospital, Kelly makes Mason swear to drop the charges against Joe before she'll agree to go into surgery.
Yeah.
And Mason's kind of pushing against that, but Cece's very annoyed that Kelly's, hasn't been rushed to surgery yet, so he kind of forces Mason to agree.
Yeah. Yeah.
So she's wheeled into surgery, and then Joe sees his family there, and they tell him that John has died.
Yeah.
And that was it.
Yeah. That was pretty much it. We didn't see any Peter again this episode, did we?
No, we never find out.
Still no word
if
on
Mason
Sally?
found anything. No word on Sally or Mr. Bottoms.
No.
Is anyone still in jeopardy, though? I think the Andrades are safe, the Lockridges are all safe. I think that wraps up all the people who are in jeopardy from the earthquake. Just the ones we haven't seen. Don't know what they're up to. I don't think any. Well, I suppose some more gas mains could explode, I suppose. I guess we'll find out if this wraps it up for the earthquake. I mean, the way things are going with all the Red Cross workers and then none of the water and electricity working yet, it doesn't seem to me like this is something that's going to just not be there the next day.
Yeah.
I think they're going to be recovering slowly. I mean, soap operas move pretty slow, and I don't know how long they're going to. I don't want to say drag it out, but I guess in the real world, it would take weeks for a city to get back on its feet.
Well, I think just rebuilding the Capwell house. The Lockridge house apparently is fine, but the Capwell house is a crumbling ruin. So.
It could do with a few less pillars, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the camera people are constantly having to go around pillars to get a good shot of things. So, yeah, we'll see if they take the opportunity to remodel some of the sets. And I guess we will be back after we watch episode 80 of Santa Barbara.
See ya.
Welcome back.
Hello.
We've just watched episode 80 of Santa Barbara. This episode originally aired on November 16th, 1984. So Joe wants Peter to tell him all about the night of Channing's death. Peter says he'll only talk to Kelly. Joe tells Mason, and Mason tries to get Peter to talk, but once again, he'll only talk to Kelly.
Yeah.
What I'm going to tell her will shock everyone. Lionel arrives to check on one of his divers. Sophia arrives dressed as a mourner with a veil. She enters the chapel and prays for Kelly. Lionel and Eden enter the chapel, and Sophia leaves. Lionel tells Eden he told Augusta everything. He tells her her attempt to haunt him failed. She doesn't know what he's talking about, and he doesn't believe her. He says it's over, and leaves. Eden says it's not over. So, Sophia's disguised as a mourner. I guess there's a lot of them after all the deaths, so she figured that would be a good disguise. That way she gets to have a veil.
The beard.
Yeah. She walks past a lot of people that she knows, but no one really spots her. And then, Lionel wants to just forget about Eden, but Eden doesn't want it to be over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Lockridge's well is working, and Minx has invited everyone in the neighborhood to come get water.
Mm-hmm.
Summer comes by and meets Minx. Danny and Rosa come for water. Then Eden shows up. She's wearing a sweater that she had pulled out of her mother's closet.
Mm-hmm.
And Lionel remembers that sweater and has a flashback. Augusta tells Eden off for exaggerating things with Lionel. Warren thinks the best idea is to go and get those coins. So he goes out to the desert, climbs into the cave, digs up the coins, rides back home, drops a few at one point, puts them back in the bag. He's hasn't really had a lot of luck keeping those coins from falling, on the ground.
I really would have thought having them buried under a mountain would have achieved all of his objectives.
Yeah, it's somewhat surprising that he's now dug them up again. He hands them all to Lionel, though, so maybe they'll be safer. He says these coins are cursed because of your relationship with Sophia, and hopefully Lionel will get rid of the coins. Rosa and Danny meet Summer. Gina says she's moving to Santa Barbara. Santana says there's an opening in her building. This is a good idea to get Gina and Brandon living close to her.
Yeah.
And then Gina says that she had to sell the house in Bel Air to pay Stockman's debts, and that she's going to have to brush up on her shorthand and typing.
Yeah.
Then she says, "I've been down before," and then Summer kind of tells her to shut up about that.
Yeah, so that immediately perks our interest to what on earth might have triggered Summer's reaction, what Gina's down and out status before had meant for her life, and what she might have done.
Gina says, "Oh, don't worry, I wasn't going to say anything," but I mean, everyone heard it.
Yeah.
So, then Gina tells Cece that Santana's been a good friend, and then they discuss about how her losing Stockman is similar to him losing Sophia, and I was thinking just in that scene that maybe Gina has an interest in Cece.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering too. It would be an interesting thing if Santana did end up with Mason and Gina did end up with CC, at least for a while. See how that would play out.
Yeah, it'd be interesting if Sophia came back. I assume CC would want her, so...
Well, he would still legally be married to her, wouldn't he?
I don't think so. I think once you die, your marriage is null. But in true soap opera style, it would be best if she showed up just as Cece was about to marry Gina. Or immediately after. So that means a few more months, I would hope.
Yeah, could be.
I can't imagine things with Gina would progress that quickly. Mason checks to see if Santana has decided to marry him yet. She has not yet made a decision. She says she's got too much in her head.
I thought it was funny how he sort of presented his case to her as a true lawyer. And he lays out all of the things he has to offer apart from his love for a good standard of living, for example. And he builds a case for her.
Talks again about he'd want to have children right away if she wants, otherwise he could wait. He's flexible on that.
He starts a negotiation, in a way.
Yeah, so she's had a lot on her mind. He tries to kiss her, and she's not really into that at this point. Then he just puts his arms around her, and Cece walks in. So he actually says to Gina a little bit later that Santana is seeing Mason. So Santana mentions to Cece that Brandon and Gina are moving to Santa Barbara. And she also says she's earned the rights to be friend with Gina and Brandon.
Yes.
And Cece doesn't really counter that, so maybe he's okay with that now. Kelly survives her surgery, and she talks to Joe about the fact that they got married, so she remembers that immediately after her surgery. Once Joe leaves, Sophia sneaks in to see her, and she only has a few seconds in there because Cece comes in and demands to know who she is, and she runs away.
Yes.
So that makes me wonder, who's the first person going to be that sees Sophia?
Yeah, I don't know.
I thought it was going to be, Joe and Kelly. Then I thought, oh, maybe it'll be Cruz. Then at one point I thought, oh, maybe it'll be Cece. And then I thought maybe it'll be Lionel or Eden. I mean, they've all had run-ins, and now I'm thinking they're probably just doing that to bug us, to make, each potential person just miss her. So
I wonder if it'll be someone who doesn't recognize her. And, and then maybe at some later point sees a photo of her or something. If it'll come
someone like Gina, maybe.
Yeah, or come in through a sort of backdoor way like that, just to prolong it a little bit.
Brandon. That's about it. That's how the week ended, the week of the big earthquake. I guess our aftershocks are over. There's still some reporters hanging around. I don't know how long they'll be around. And, I guess life will slowly return back to normal, and we'll see how the various places get remodeled. The Andradas spent the episode cleaning up their place. So.
What do you think Peter's shocking revelation could be, if he ever?
Well, I think I remember it, so I better not say.
Okay.
I mean, I have an idea of something I think it is. So yeah, I better not say, but it's fun. It's fun for the whole family, not the Capwell family, but. All right, we will be back after we watch episode 81 of Santa Barbara. We might be doing that on a cruise. So we will see you in a week. Bye-bye.
See ya.